those of you who are native English speakers will know that that question is ambiguous. Of course, RASE as a methodology is named after requirements, applicability, selections and exceptions. So to ask why it's a four-letter word is to ask why aren't there more options, more colours when we mark up documents, or maybe fewer. There's also another sense for the question, which is that in English a four-letter word is the kind of words you wouldn't want to say in front of a respectable audience like you. A four-letter word is a euphemism for all the words we borrowed from the Danes and the Germans a long time ago. Anyway, I was told that that wasn't a good enough title, so I added a long theoretical sentence in the end. But what I want to talk about is this question of why four. I'm going to talk a little bit about the introduction and the problem statement, and then I'm going to take you through some steps of an analysis of some of the good reasons and some of the bad reasons for trying to ways of answering that question. And then we will reach a conclusion, which is that four is a very good number. So I've asked the question, what is a four-letter word? It's a word that contains four letters. Why are there only four colours used in RASE markup? But as it's, is it an offensive euphemism for profane or offensive words? Is there an issue about RASE being unacceptable? And we saw in one of the earlier presentations lots of talk about application developers and programmers being involved. And the challenge here is that we don't need them. And so it's actually a challenge, one of the challenges about RASE is what do we do with all these programmers we don't need anymore? So a quick introduction to RASE. Essentially, it uses four colours to mark up any sentence, no matter how complicated, using four different colours. Because if you want to pass a regulation, if you want a particular object to pass a regulation, there are four ways you can do that. You can either say, this door in this building is exactly as required by the regulation. Perfect. On the other hand, you could say it's accepted, because it's not a door used by the public, or maybe in England it's a door in a shop front, and shopkeepers are the most important people in England, and so all the regulations make exceptions for shops. Not selected, well, if we're talking about doors and windows, you're defining the scope with a number of choices. So, like the chocolate box, you have a choice of things. And not applicable, we even have an abbreviation in English, N/A, meaning not applicable. All the things that decide what's in scope. And all regulations can be marked up using that idea in a nested way, and it generates a logical statement, which, if you remember logic when you were at school, then you're probably the same age as me, because I'm not sure it's taught anymore. But it means that as soon as you've done the markup, you can actually execute the regulation. You don't need any, well, you only need a few lines of software to execute it. However, people have continued to say that RASE is a pre-processing step, as the result cannot be directly interpreted by the computer. Yes, it can. So there are some misconceptions out there, and maybe you will throw some other ones at me when it comes to questions. But let's get back to let's look at an example. RASE works, but it's not accepted. And then there's this other question, why are there exactly four colours? And when I train people to do RASE, or to understand RASE, it's a question that comes up after about 5 minutes. They listen attentively, and it sounds like magic. And it sounds like the old thing about you only need four colours to colour a map, which was stated hundreds of years ago and only proved by a massive computer a few years ago. So why the four colours? You can see here one of the more obscure regulations in the UK, and yes, you need some boxes, but you need these four colours to sort out all the different things. And I should just say, if anyone's reading it, this is about excavation, support and battering. Battering is not something you do to another person. Battering is putting in slopes into the shape of an excavation. I'm not advocating violence of any kind. So yes, it seems to work. It seems to be able to generate applications, checking software, diagrams, decision trees where they're wanted. So, but we have to answer this question, why four? And as I say, it comes up in teaching and learning, and one kind of teaching is teaching people. The other thing that I'm working on is teaching large language models to do the markup. And it comes down to the same thing. You have to feed either the people or the large language model with a set of rules, and then you can get the right answer. I can't prove it, but that statement at the bottom with the markup was generated by a large language model early in the day. By lunchtime, it started getting things wrong, which is one of those things about large language models. So it's important to find out why four, because you need to be able to teach the ideas. One of the ideas about why four is numerology, the worship of numbers. Now, yeah, 4 is a magic number. It turns up in all sorts of cultural things. There are 4 elements, according to Greek science. There are 4 humours in the human body. The Pythagoreans thought that 4 was a number for harmony, proportion, stability. All sorts of things come into how we think of numbers, and sometimes they're contradictory. Feng Shui says 4 is wonderful because it's stability. Unfortunately, in Chinese mysticism, it says 4 is about death because they sound similar in Chinese. So we very easily, culturally, fall into the trap of seeing some numbers and saying that's good. Isaac Newton, well, first of all, general question, how many colours are there in a rainbow? 7? 1. No? It's white. If you put it back together again. No, there are 7 because Isaac Newton, when he played around with the prism, found 5. But he didn't like the number 5, so he said, I'm going to invent a colour called orange and a colour called indigo to get to 7. And so now we all think, or most of us think, that there are 7 colours in the rainbow. Why did you want 7? I'm not sure I can give you a definite answer, but there happened to be 7 heavenly bodies at that time that people knew about. So, you know, numbers get to us in a really strange way. And what happens is we reach a number we like, and we stop searching. We don't look for whether there are 5 colours in RASE or 3, because we've arrived at 4, and that's a nice number. A lot of people like 4. So there is a trap, and if you want to see another example there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. Why 17? You have to look very hard to find the answer. So, sometimes we just have to accept that the answer is 4. There are 4 points of the compass. I defy anyone in this room to actually explain why there are 4. There are currently 4 fundamental forces, which we kind of sort of think that's probably the limit, but we can't prove that we won't find a 5th one. And I mentioned colouring the map. So there are times when we make a de facto statement, pragmatically take it as an assumption and move on. But that's unsatisfactory for RASE because I'm asking you and other people to commit to RASE as a method, and if people are going to invest in the ideas and implementation, we've got to have a better answer. I don't know if Eilif is in the audience, but he came up with a very interesting analogy in 2011. Aristotle had a thing training called the Square of Oppositions, and it was part of teaching of public speaking to understand that diagram and the way that certain statements like all S's are P's and no S's are P's and some S's are not P and some S's are P. That was part of the training in medieval times and in of rhetoric, of actually the ideas you had to convey if you were going to persuade someone. And it's nice to say, well, that's a bit like RASE, where you've got four things and there's a logo arranged in a four-way. It's complete nonsense. It's just a coincidence. But we can make analogies and then stop thinking. So where might we find a good answer? Well, there's a thing called grammar about how we analyse sentences. And I only speak English and IFC, but my only human language is English. But I think most languages, there's this habit of dividing things up into subjects and objects in a sentence. So that gets us to sort of the two classification. Perhaps we could argue that applications and selections are about the subject and requirements and exceptions are about the object of the sentence. That would be really neat, wouldn't it? That would be 2 by 2. We'd get 4, we could all go home early. Unfortunately, exceptions apply both to the subject of a regulation or to the object. And so it just doesn't work. You can't say it's 2 by 2, it just isn't. So we came close. It seemed like there'd be an explanation based in most language grammars, and it doesn't work. So, have to look deeper. And I gave you this logical statement, which has probably got you all a bit scared, but what we want from extracting regulations and making them machine-operable by applying colourful markup is to make the sentences logically programmable or computable or executable. And actually, there are an infinite number of logical operators you can use. If you have a sentence with 5 metrics in it, then there's something like 300 possible logics you could apply to it. Not all of them have names, luckily. But we can put in 3 extra requirements. First of all, we want to be able to handle any number of concepts in the expressions. So that's called, you want to be variadic. We don't want to only deal with 1 or 2 arguments, because that's very limiting, and we don't write that way. But we also want it to be commutative and associative, mathematical terms. Don't panic, don't rush to the doors. It just means, commutative means that we want to be able to consume the information in any order. And associative means that as another piece of information comes along, we can develop our results. So, just as examples, commutativity, waterproof and fireproof is exactly the same as fireproof and waterproof. Associativity, waterproof and fireproof, and also windproof is the same as waterproof and also fireproof and windproof. We expect to be able to rearrange the ideas in our concepts and them to still work. That's what we mean by knowledge, stuff that we can rearrange. So, we've actually got an answer because only the 4 functions that you see there meet that requirement, and they are the 4 colours. So that's brilliant. But there's some other logical functions that people talk about. Exclusive or, the one everyone always forgets. So there's another one, exclusive not or. Majority, minority. And these are really odd functions, because although you can have any number of arguments and they're commutative, they're not associative. So the order you think about voting when you're looking for a majority decision then actually affects the outcome. You can't stepwise. So you can't incrementally work it out. So you need, for each of those functions, you need an outside supervisor or actor, or in government, it's called the teller, the person who counts the votes. And we don't think, that's not really what we mean by knowledge. But so we can dismiss those and say that's not applicable. If you know any regulations that include voting, I'd be very interested. So we do actually reach a point that because of the logic of knowledge, we only need these 4. And that's great, because then we can get on and implement it. So, you've heard one reason why RASE is a 4-letter word, which is that there is only 4 possible logical operators or ways of using information that meet our understanding of what knowledge really is. As for the other question, why is RASE a 4-letter word for a profane and unwelcome subject? Perhaps you'd like to make